Hey everyone, we're going to talk about bleached flour versus unbleached flour and enriched flour versus unenriched flour and what it means for you and your pizza. First, let's talk about the bleached flour. What exactly is bleached flour? We've got to understand the milling process just a little bit. So what they do is traditionally they would separate the outside of the wheat grain from the inside, from the kernel, and then they'd get the kernel and they grind it down into flour. Traditionally, they would leave this flour out in the sunshine for a few days to a couple of weeks and let it age. Because what the aging process does is it makes the gluten inside of the flour like more consistent, more strong. It's a very important part of having good flour, so you can have good baked products. Now the problem is, if you think about it, you've got all of this flour sitting out for a few days, a couple of weeks at a time, and that slows down the whole process, right? So about 120 years ago, they came up with a process to speed up this aging process for flour. And somebody figured out that if you douse the flour in chlorine gas, chlorine is in its natural state as a gas. If you douse it, if you soak it in this gas, then it speeds up this aging process. And so instead of taking a few days or a couple of weeks, it takes a couple of hours. And so they started to do that. And then in 1906, Congress made a federal law saying that this is safe to do. So that's exactly, in other words, bleaching flour is exactly what it sounds like. You're soaking the flour, or at least exposing it to chlorine gas. Now, everybody knows what chlorine is, but did you know that it was used in World War One as a poisonous gas weapon? It was actually a precursor to mustard gas you've all heard of. Mustard gas, I read, was a derivative of chlorine gas. It was just chlorine gas mixed in with one other compound to make it more potent. But actual chlorine gas was used as a chemical warfare agent in World War One. Now, they came up with other disinfectants to do the same thing that bleach was, or chlorine was. Um, there's like five or six of them, but according to this one article, it says that peroxides are the most common one. And it does the same thing. The peroxide agent they use is benzoyl peroxide, and this is the active ingredient in acne treatment because people put it on their face and it kills the bacteria on your skin and helps your acne, I guess. So regardless of what bleaching agent they're using, they all are about the same. They all are meant to kill every living thing, basically. It'll kill plants. Chlorine will kill plants. It will kill bacteria, viruses, all pathogens. And that's what they're putting flour in to bleach it, to speed up the process, which makes it a little bit cheaper for us. And well, we're going to talk more about this later, actually. But that's the bleaching process in a nutshell. It speeds up the aging of flour to save a little bit of money, make flour a little bit cheaper. So what about the enrichment? Let's see. Here is the side of the flour I've been using, my all-purpose flour from Trader Joe's. I'm not picking on Trader Joe's here. This is just what they're all putting in. So they're all putting in niacin, reduced iron, thiamine mononitrate, riboflavin, folic acid. So what exactly are these things? With the exception of iron, they are all synthetic vitamins. Why is that important? When did this start? What happened is back in the 30s, people people were just not getting enough vitamins, and not getting enough vitamins in your diet leads to various illnesses and diseases, right? And it was a real thing. I've even talked to my grandma about this. She grew up in the 30s, late 20s. She was a depression child. She grew up in a small rural community, and she told me when she was a little kid, they'd go to the county fair, and people there would actually have to educate people attending on how to go and buy canned fruits to get your vitamins, go and buy canned vegetables to get your vitamins, because at that time you couldn't just go to the grocery store and have all this great produce shipped in from South America, Central America, wherever, other parts of the US. That just wasn't available. They didn't have the shipping network back then. They pretty much were subsiding off of whatever was grown within a couple hundred miles of their community. And it was a real thing. People were not getting their vitamins. So in the 30s, the chemists developed ways to make synthetic vitamins, because obviously it's not practicable or even possible probably to extract vitamins from fruit and put it into flour. So the chemists went after it and came up with these synthetic vitamins. And it became really popular in the Second World War, from what I read. The guys overseas weren't getting enough vitamins in their diet because, it was wartime and food was scarce. And so the military demanded that they would only buy enriched flour enriched with these synthetic vitamins. And I'm certainly no chemist here, but I just looked up a few just so you can get an idea of what's going on. The first one I looked up was thiamine mononitrate. And this was kind of the most interesting one to me. Let's see, it says it's so thiamine mononitrate, it's supposedly a vitamin B1 replacement or substitute. It is made out of aminopropionitrile. What is that? I looked it up. Aminopropionitrile is prepared by the reaction of ammonia with acrylonitrile. You've all probably heard of ammonia. I just know that from basic, cleaning products in the Windex and whatever else. In other words, it's a disinfectant. It's meant to kill things. So I looked it up. Ammonia, well, like it says here, it's hazardous. Many countries, it is classified as an extremely hazardous substance that is, highly regulated. So, in the same Wikipedia article, they had some interesting studies about exposing fish to ammonia and seeing what happens in basically a very small dosage. So at 0.05 milligram per liter, that's a tiny little drop in a liter of water, fish would become less fertile and more susceptible to bacteria and diseases. Fish that were exposed to 2 milligrams per liter, just a small little drop, would suffer gill damage, tissue damage, comas, and death. The other ingredient in this thiamine mononitrate is acrylonitrile. I know I'm pronouncing these wrong, forgive me. It's organic and it's used for plastics, and it is reactive and toxic at low doses. So these are the ingredients that they're extracting or creating vitamins out of, supposedly. Next, let's look at riboflavin. So this is, again, another synthetic vitamin, and it is created out of fermented fungus and genetically modified bacteria. And they're saying that's a vitamin for you. And I'm not a chemist, obviously, but I can read and I'm just looking into this stuff, I'm going to tell you why this is so important here in a few minutes, or how it's important to me at least. Okay, the next one is niacin. Niacin, okay, this one I started looking into the ingredients. Again, it's just another synthetic vitamin B6. And this one I started to go down this huge rabbit hole because there was multiple levels, multiple tranches of synthetic ingredients. In other words, they'd have two ingredients, they'd do a chemical reaction, and then you have a new ingredient, and then they synthesize that with another ingredient, and now you've got this thing. Then you take it and you synthesize it with another ingredient, and you do this several times, and then all of a sudden they say it's vitamin B6. So kind of interesting. The next one, folic acid. This is actually really interesting. This again is a substitute vitamin B9. So the real vitamin is called folate, but the synthetic version is called folic acid. It was actually really interesting how little information there was on folic acid. There's not even a Wikipedia article on folic acid. So I had to look into it, dig a little bit deeper, and I had to look up the actual patent, figure out how folic acid is made. And so here's the formula, and it makes no sense to me. I don't know what any of this stuff is, but that's how they get folic acid. A whole bunch of different things, different organic compounds. Sometimes maybe some of them are inorganic. I don't know. I started to look them up, and it's just one big rabbit hole. Basically, they're mixing together a whole bunch of stuff and then telling you that it's good for you. It's a vitamin B9 substitute. Okay, the last one. For out of all of these enrichment ingredients, this is the only one that is kind of natural, which is reduced iron. Iron is important. You get it from beef and other kind of meats and dark greens. And people weren't getting it, and so they started to put little tiny iron dust into your flour. So that's what they use to enrich your flour with vitamins, synthetic vitamins. So why is this important? So I'm going to tell you a story. My wife is from Taiwan, and she moved to Canada in her teens and has lived in the West, US, and Canada ever since. And about 10 years ago, she developed a gluten intolerance. It wasn't, it's not celiac disease, but it's just intolerance. It's not good for her body in various ways. And she basically just cut it out of her diet more or less. And she went back to Taiwan a couple of years ago, and she gave in to some of her childhood treats, favorite treats, and ate a bunch of pastries over there. And it didn't affect her body hardly at all. And she told me that, and I was pretty amazed by it. And I was thinking, how could that be? Is it just like an emotional thing where she is more at ease? At home, it's like a vacation for her. She was just there with her family. And then I started thinking about the flour. Maybe the flour is different. And so I did some research. And what I learned was that most of the world has outlawed bleached flour, including Taiwan, China, Australia, New Zealand, the European Union, Brazil. I mean, almost everybody but the US. Almost every major developed country but the US has outlawed bleached flour because of its potential cancer causing agents that they add to it, chlorine. I guess I'm not a scientist, but the debate is nobody, I don't think, argues that chlorine is not chlorine and the other disinfectants they use. Nobody's arguing that they're not cancer causing, but what the disagreement is over is whether or not they cause cancer in very small traces. Some scientists say, hey, if it's carcinogenic, it's carcinogenic. It's going to cause cancer no matter what. It may take longer if there's only traces of it, but it will nonetheless contribute to cancer. But the FDA says, nope, there's no evidence of that. So that's the argument. And so when I learned this, my wife came back and we started doing some experiments. And I started using my Italian flour that I use for my pizza napoletana because it's from Italy and there's nothing in there but wheat. And surprisingly, she was able to handle it really good. I mean, much, much better than any other American flour. So I was telling my sister about this, and she told me about one of her daughters who also has problems with gluten, not celiac disease, but it just is not good for her body. And they were in Europe one time traveling, and she observed that her daughter was able to handle the French pastries with no problem. And so when they came back from Europe, my sister just started buying French flour and using it to make food for her, bread and whatever, for her niece. And she doesn't have any problem with the French flour. Um, And so my sister, she's not much of a researcher, but I told her what I was learning. She just simply observed that her daughter could handle flour, pastries, foods made with French flour and not American flour. And I thought that was interesting because in my little circles here, I mean, there's probably 15 people my whole life that I actually talk about gluten intolerance with, right? And out of this small handful of people, I know two of them that are adversely affected by bleached flour, bleached and or enriched flour. I don't know which one it is. Um, but I got online and just did some Google searches, and apparently a lot of people are out there with the same dilemma. They can handle European flour, European pastries, but not American stuff. So take that for what it's worth. Maybe you or somebody you know has issues with flour. It may be worth an experiment to get some European flour. It's really easy to order. I just order it online on Amazon and see if that helps at all. Um, as far as taste goes, so how does this apply to your pizza? I've experimented a little bit with bleach flour, enriched flour versus the stuff I use now, King Arthur bread flour, which has no bleach and no enrichments. And honestly, the King Arthur flour just tastes a lot better. Is it because of the not bleaching process? Is it because there's no poisonous gas added to the flour? Maybe. Is it because there's not all these synthetic vitamins added? Maybe. Maybe they're just using better tasting wheat kernels. I don't know. It'd probably take a huge study to figure out exactly why King Arthur flour tastes better than every other brand I've tried that is bleached or enriched. But that's just what I've observed. Oh, when I was in New York this last time, a couple months ago, I paid particular attention to how crust tasted. You know, just eating the rim of the crust and paying really close attention to how it tasted without any sauce or cheese on it. And one thing that I noticed is that Famous Joe's Pizza, Greenwich Village, you know, one of those famous pizzerias in New York, it actually had really bland tasting crust, just very low flavor crust. And online, there's a guy who apparently worked at Joe's for decades, and he put the recipe out there, and not a big surprise, Joe's is using bleached flour. You go up to Patsy's in Harlem, and they have the most flavorful crust I've ever had in New York, and they really pride themselves on using the exact same ingredients, the same methods they have since the 30s, which was before. I mean, I guess not before they started bleaching, but well, it was before they started enriching. I'm just assuming that the flour that Patsy's uses is not bleached, not enriched. It just had so much flavor. So that's it. It's worth doing your own experiments. Um, Try it. If you have bleached flour in your house, do a side by side. Do it side by side so you can taste one out right after another, because it does make a difference. You know, if you taste one day and the other the next, it's just not the same. Do a side by side. Try bleached flour versus unbleached. Let me know what you find out. My observation is that unbleached, unenriched flour just simply has a much more deep taste to it. Thanks.